Sometimes things happen that really make you wonder. And in this 2-for-1 special, we are not just covering both the latest in tiering in Gens 5 and 4, but we are looking at how something like this makes us reconsider our relationship with any generation, potentially. The game of Pokemon as a whole. Maybe we even go beyond the game of Pokemon and think about the people in our lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing to know is that Reuniclus has resoundingly not been banned in Generation 5. It was not even close. So, as you see there, the numbers posted by who else but Finchinator. I'm sure he rigged them. Anyway, so that's Gen 5, and in Gen 4, the idea of banning just Dynamic Punch so you can preserve Machamp, that got shut down by the higher-ups. And so it was pretty much Machamp or bust, and there was not enough support for just Machamp. So what these two definitely have some things in common, as we will explore. Yeah, so the basic idea, Reuniclus is obviously a bigger one, because it contributes more to the fabric of its metagame than Machamp. That was another argument towards getting rid of Machamp. Ideally just Dynamic Punch, because old generations being what they are, you can prune them, you can just kind of get rid of the small stuff, to make it the best version of what it is, as opposed to completely overhauling it. So when we choose to get rid, we choose to stick with this kind of thing, people often talk about, oh, there's too many bans. It's like, what is too many bans? I don't understand that. I understand that you shouldn't ban something that doesn't need to be banned, but people act like we're not talking about some of the most heinous, complained about elements of the game when we're looking at things like Machamp. It's like, yes, the whole point. We have banned Swagger before. I would much rather face Swagger than Machamp. So I look at it like that. But when we accept this kind of thing, when we tell ourselves, oh, I don't think this is a problem, then it's weird because we kind of set ourselves up for these almost, I don't want to say self-destructive patterns, that's maybe a little much, but these patterns that definitely aren't what you might call healthy, because we complain about these things, we know how bad they are, and then we stick with them. We say, when the time comes for actual action, we say, you know what, it's not that bad. All the people I've seen say, just get good with against Machamp, for example. I've also seen them rail against it. I've seen them rail against how Machamp totally ruins the tier, makes it degenerate, all the stuff we know about it. But then when the time comes to actually do something about it, it's not that bad. You can play around it with things like Ghost types and Lumberries, as if that is A, the point, B, even true. And does that sound familiar? Like, this is not just a Pokemon thing. We complain about things, we know that they're bad for us, and then we kind of put up with them. We keep playing. And yeah, knowing where to draw the line is important. With Reuniclus, this is a really complicated thing because Reuniclus is much more part of the tier than Machamp. Machamp, by and large, is something you load when you are trying to BS the opponent. And I'll put it this way, if I feel that I can outskill my opponent with my, strong fighting type, I'm not saying I rule out Machamp entirely, but my need to go deep punch everything in sight with Machamp significantly decreases because I am relying more on my own positioning and playing than whether Machamp will break through something. Because Machamp breaking through something like Skarmory is based on a dice roll. A very high percentage dice roll, but a dice roll nonetheless. Whereas with something like Breloom, just as strong, actually stronger because it uses superpower. Or Focus Punch even, or Swords Dance, these things that are much more reliable, not RNG dependent, then if you're breaking through it or not before the turn starts. With Machamp, it's the odds are a lot higher. And people were wondering, God, there were things being said about Machamp that I was just blowing my mind. I've never seen so many people talk about Machamp's positive qualities for the tier until now. it went from being this universally despised Pokemon that ruined the tier to somehow being a very important contributor to the integrity, the defensive and offensive integrity of a lot of teams. Like, yeah, it's good for breaking through defensive teams. It's actually less good at breaking through defensive, like purely defensive teams. Those are among the best. I keep seeing, oh, it punishes slow, greedy, Clefable teams. It's like those are among the better styles at dealing with Machamp because they've got so much physical bulk. They're likely to have a Rotom. People often say, oh, 8 Dynamic Punch PP. That rarely comes into play, let me tell you. But, almost besides the point. And I had another point that I was getting to after the... I've never seen so many people defend it until now, but maybe I said it already. I don't know. It's makes you think about your relationship to these kinds of teams, the metagame that they're in, the kind of culture and player base that has definitely moved a lot more towards, if I am not feeling confident in defeating my opponent, I'm just going to start rolling the dice. I'm not going to try to improve. I'm just going to start BSing my way through. And I personally don't think that that is a good thing to have in the game. People will say, oh, well, the same people who will complain about RNG constantly. And I recognize that hypocrisy, that cognitive dissonance is just a part of it. But what makes it so interesting is that I just lost my point. Damn it. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. It's been an emotional time. Anyway, so to go back to Reuniclus for a second, because I realized I was going to go there and then didn't stick with it. Reuniclus is more of a part of the tier, and I recognize that it does help slow down offensive things, but I'm actually less annoyed by the Reuniclus thing than the Machamp thing. Just because, yes, I do think Reuniclus should be banned. I think it's a silly Pokemon that doesn't really have a place in a truly balanced tier. But at the same time, maybe Reuniclus sticking around is just the final acceptance that, it is not going to ever be the ideal version. That doesn't really exist. And holding it up to some sort of standard, I mean, it's a possible standard that Reuniclus could exist in some sort of balanced tier. But it's not really a realistic one. At least not balanced the way we're used to. Just kind of accepting of a lot of flaws, a lot of really negative aspects of the game that kind of give it its charm, which, I'm no stranger to that kind of idea. I like a lot of music where the sound quality, for example, is quote-unquote objectively bad, or, they can't play their instruments, stuff like that. Technical precision is not the most important part. But, you have to ask yourself these similar questions when it comes to Pokemon metagames. And, and there's no right answer. I'm not here to tell you the right answer. It's more to get you to think about it for yourself. I really don't like what Reuniclus does in the tier. But again, I understand that it does bring some positives. Peng's points that, it demands precise play, that it makes games go on longer. I like those things. I just happen to think it crosses the line. And this is another interest of mine of late. Discourse in the modern era. And not just Pokemon. Very rarely does it feel like you see someone change their minds based off of pure logic. And if they do, it's over time. It's not going to be immediately conceding to the other side in a debate. It's going to be looking at it years later once it's, safe for their ego to say, oh, well, I was wrong. I've been there before. I've definitely been incorrect about wanting to axe things. I can't think of any right now. But, I don't know. It does make you kind of consider the Stockholm Syndrome aspect of it all. Where, it's not just about the metagame itself, because if you don't like the game, don't play, but a lot of us stick around to play the game because of the social aspect. And then, well, what tier do you play? Oh, well, a tier I don't actually like. You know how many times I've seen people playing a tier that they claim to hate for years and years and just constantly complaining about it, and so well, why do you still play it? Well, I like being around. I like and if you go to another tier, then the problem is kind of solved. I don't know. There are a lot of overlapping factors here, but the Machamp thing really kind of irks me, though, because this one feels so... I mean, okay, I understand what it is, but it reminds me so much of Scald, and I'm sure I made this point in my original Machamp video, but I don't care. Where so many people so many high-level players would rail against the presence of Scald for so long. Oh, it's garbage. It's bullshit. It's the stupidest fucking thing you've ever seen in your life. And then the idea is like, okay, guys, how about we do what we're supposed to do? Oh, I remember my point from earlier. Excellent. How about we do what we're supposed to do, and get rid of the things that are bad for the game. And then they're like, you know what? Actually, I like that I can click Scald. I like that I can... So, I don't know. Maybe it's a Diamond and Pearl Garchomp situation where you had players going, you know what? I actually like abusing this broken thing. I don't want to ban it. And then they just complain when it goes against them. I mean, maybe I'm assigning too much... maybe I'm, putting too much... I don't want to say putting too much faith in people. That's over-dramatic even for me, but... yeah, maybe it is that simple. But yeah, the idea is like, oh, well, too many bans, why do you do it? Well, the whole reason why we have bans, which is, because we want the better player to win. If people say, oh, well, just deal with Machamp confusion and you won't always win, obviously you're not always going to win, even if you play better. That's Pokemon. That's going to be in the game no matter what we remove. People will throw around this idea, oh, well, why are you banning, why don't you just ban every piece of RNG then? And, if you ask me, you know what, I actually think that's kind of cool. But because the whole point is that the reason we have rules, the reason we don't allow Mewtwo in OU is that whether it's Mewtwo or, Double Team or whatever stupid thing that's banned, Freeze Claws, whatever, it's because some things are too strong, whether they are outspeeding and OHKOing everything to a disproportionate amount, or because they are... too RNG dependent. They take the game out of the player's hands. We do this for the purpose of making the better player win. That is the game we play. And if that's not really your deal, like, oh, I just want to play Pokemon, I don't really care about the specifics, then why get involved in this in general? Well, because people like having their toys to play with. I get that. So much of these debates is me, arguing with myself and then realizing I know the answer to the other side. But, and this is, again, another life lesson, I guess. Well, God, this one's really full of them, isn't it? It's not about being right or not. It's about, people feeling comfortable or not. And, whether or not you're actually right about something, it's almost besides the point. It is in many cases. Being right is just another tool to try and win a debate. It doesn't actually matter. And I realize that's a kind of a dark viewpoint, but I don't know. Enough of both the Pokemon world and the real world has left me. I don't want to say disillusioned. I guess some days are different than others. Where I mean, look, not long ago. It depends, right? You don't want to always think doom and gloom, because it wasn't all that long ago that we actually banned Cloyster from Black and White OU. That was fantastic. That's another, Pokemon that a lot of people were saying, oh, just, counter it with insert stupid thing here. And so I don't know, maybe yeah, at the same time, just accepting things the way they are, there's a difference between accepting them because that's what, because you can't do anything to change them, and accepting them as okay. I hope I've made that distinction clear. Just because something is the way it is doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way it could be, or the most fair or whatever. I didn't mean for this video to start turning into Zen cones, but yeah, that's a nice high opinion of this I have. But yeah, it's a lot of things to think about regarding Reuniclus, regarding Machamp, regarding everything. You know, the metagames they're in, the game of Pokemon as a whole, going beyond Pokemon. Yeah, I don't know. Lately I've been getting the itch to play again. It's not even like a genuine itch. It's just, when some other dark things happen, then Pokemon's always there, beckoning you to come back. And, my lady and I, just had to take a week off, and we rewatched all of BoJack Horseman inside a week, which was a great time, actually. An intense experience, to be sure. But, like, every time, this is my addiction story, if we want to get really fucking dark. But, every time, something bad happens, and it's just so easy to just go right back to the negative behaviors of the past. Obviously, moderation is the key. God, I'm really going off the book. But this is the kind of confusion that Machamp inspires in you, Yeah, it's so easy to just, get sucked back into it. Obviously, getting sucked back into it is not necessarily a bad thing if you do it the normal way. Speaking of confusion, I mean, yeah, trying to figure out metagames is, like trying to figure out others' behavior. Whether it's about, real life things or about Pokemon, who can, and that's what we're constantly trying to do, or I'm trying to do anyway, and drive myself crazy with it. Saying to myself, how can person X, say this and yet behave like this? How can we go from a decade plus of Machamp is ruining this game, is so unbalanced, I hate DPP, to, what, Machamp actually contributes some very important balance to the game by punishing, and it's so wrong. This is not something I'm drawing a parallel to in like a real life example. Although, I mean, yes, that too. I was thinking of something else, and trying to figure out people's behavior. I know people's behavior can be contradictory, and then some people go, well, humans are contradictory. That's the whole thing. That doesn't make the contradiction okay, you stupid fucking... Anyway, I'm arguing with the voices in my head again, but those voices are based on real people's voices. I really, really detest that. When someone does something hypocritical and says, what, I'm a person, I'm contradictory, you gotta accept that. It's like, why are you so okay with reveling in your own flaws? And I'm not talking about, everyone's flawed. You got to be nice to yourself. There's a difference between accepting flaws and then outright, brandishing them. I don't know. Yeah, leave it to Machamp and Reuniclus to get a guy existential. Am I right? Not that that's not my default mode anyway, but yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna go to the gym and then do things later. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.